The good thing with this, I think, is that it appears as if, from our conversation with the Department of Education is willing to do this, and look like they're welcoming doing it, and they're saying basically it can be done at no real additional cost. You're talking about putting the information on their website. Anytime you've dealt with any school district and you start talking LCFF, many of them, you get a wide range of responses. Half the people don't know what money came in, where it went. Sometimes districts can tell you all kinds of things. You never figure out whether or not there's actual programs in place or not in place. All LCAPs come in at different kind of formats, and so it's really hard to deal with. It would provide us at least with some statewide information, and since the state board doesn't seem to have any problems doing it and think they can do it within their current budget, it seems like a great idea would happen, because we end up, at least at this level, with the data we need. It's not collecting any data that they shouldn't be collecting, because if they have to create the LCAPs. If they're getting supplemental dollars, they have to know the kids that they're serving. They have to know how many kids with certain language issues. All that data they had to collect the very first year, else they couldn't get the money in terms of certifying the number of kids who had language issues, foster care, you know, the whole 9 yards, the economic issues. So they had to identify that from up front, and they're supposed to be writing plans that talk about how they're meeting the needs of those different students, and should be at some point beginning to look at data that takes them forward in terms of the goals that they're trying to achieve. So this, I think, would be a first step in terms of getting some statewide data on what's happening with our schools, whether or not local control funding formula is actually working for every kid, whether or not the money we're putting in is going into the targeted populations that it should. All those questions I ask regularly when I meet with my districts, and I've got about 6 or 7 districts in San Diego County that are in the 79th, and I get a wide range of answers from each one of them. Not that their answers are wrong, but it would be great to be able to click on and go one place and find the data that I would want to get from all of my districts. This is an opportunity to do that. Doesn't cost us anything to do it. Our folks in LAO, our staff is willing to work with you to refine the language, and of course CDE is as well. So we're looking forward to it.
No, yes. Now that I've got my notes in order,
Senator Lara,
on this issue, again, I want to just echo Assemblywoman Weber's issue. You know, we entered in good faith partnership with the administration on LCFF, and I think what we're asking here for is fair, especially when we look at the fact that the ELAs don't report to the state of the legislature. We're just trying to make sure that LCFF is working the way it's supposed to. And for a lot of us in the educational equity environment, we know people are cognizant that the LCFF is doing a good job, I think. I think the important thing is just to be able to find an avenue where we can look at statewide data to be able to cross-reference and ensure that those things that are exactly what Ms. Weber's talking about, ensuring that the money is going to the kids, that the parent involvement piece is working, and understanding that, you know, some of us don't want to mess with LCFF. We want to see it work. We want to see it flourish, and then go back and evaluate it. But that doesn't stop us from looking at current data to see ways that we can tweak it as well, to provide those recommendations to the administration. Because the fact of the matter is that although we do have LCFF, it seems to be working. It is also not the end-all, be-all to education policy in our state. There's other issues that we need to address as well. This is a big component to that, and I think we really have revolutionized our poor people spending and the way we spend for our public schools, not taking that away from anybody. And I think the governor should be commended for that. But we also need to be able to have the metrics to see if it's working in it's not only statewide, but in particular districts. So just something to keep in mind of as we move forward on this issue.
so Ian Johnson, Department of Finance, I think the administration's response to that would just be that from our perspective, this sort of a direction is a bit premature and unnecessary, and it's really a devolving of where we feel like the state is going when it comes to accountability in this state. So we overhauled the funding system for schools, and along with that, we overhauled the accountability structure, and that included LCAPs, which districts are filling out. And one thing that should be noted is that since the LAO report on LCAPs came out this year, the LCAP template has been revised by the state board. And so now Section 3 of the LCAP very clearly states that an LEA has to show how much supplemental and concentration grant funding they're receiving and what they're doing for those certain students to improve those services. County offices of education are the primary entities that are charged with approving those LCAPs and making sure that they comply with statute. And then as Ms. Bosser mentioned, currently the evaluation rubrics are being developed by the State Board, and they'll be adopted in October of 2015. The evaluation rubrics have a number of tasks that are envisioned, but one of them, when this was contemplated, was that the state could have potentially a role in accountability, but it's a different role. It's a role of sort of layers where accountability is implemented at the local level, and then evaluation rubrics allow locals, districts, county offices, and ultimately potentially the superintendent to evaluate are LEAs meeting the needs of their students in the 8 state priorities that we've put in statute, and if not, then there are other support systems in place, such as a county office of education, or as also Ms. Bosser mentioned, the Collaborative for Educational Excellence, which is also sort of starting to get up and running. And so we don't necessarily think that the state has no role when it comes to accountability. It's just that this has been contemplated. There are things in place that are being developed. And so we think going in this direction, again, as I mentioned, is a bit of a devolving of where we're headed when it comes to accountability for the state.
Senator Lara.
The frustrating part here is that every time we try to ask for more information, the one response we keep on getting back is it's premature. We'll wait for the LCFF to work its way out. But what you just explained to me can also work with what our members in the Assembly are asking for. And it's not that we want the state to have a role, but it seems like the administration doesn't want the legislature to have a role on how we tweak LCFF. And I think we merit to have that. So it gets frustrating after a while when we keep on trying to fix LCFF. We're supporters of LCFF, but it continues to seem that, by just saying it's premature and just, kissing off any other tweaks that are needed is, I think, kind of disrespectful.
May I just also offer a clarifying comment that the language passed by the Assembly is not necessarily an accountability mechanism, but rather just an aggregation of data that's already provided within the LCAP and is in no way changing any of the requirements upon districts under the local control funding formula. Is simply aggregating 3 components of the data within the LCAPs.
Right. That's exactly, I understand it correctly, but I'm just, in overall, anytime we talk about LCFF, it's premature. We can't touch it. So it's just a broader opinion, but I agree with you 100%.
I was just going to simply say, and it's all been said, and I assume as we talk, both houses have agreed that this needs to happen. So, we don't have to have permission to do it. So we still write the laws and do the budget. Governor can decide what he wants to do with it. But it's extremely important that we look at this as just an opportunity for information to be gathered statewide in one space, so that anyone who comes along, whether they're from kindergarten through college, can make an informed decision about what's going on in our schools, and look at the reports that are being put out there. It's unreasonable to ask a citizen to look at over 1,000 LCAPs and see what's going on in California schools. It ought to be in one place, and this is all that's there. And since it's interesting because the Department of Education is not giving pushback. They're embracing it, so I assume that everyone else will embrace it as well. Only thing I'd caution us on, and not us, but on those who are here testifying, is that the use of the term accountability is more serious than what you guys are giving. Accountability is not everybody just simply telling a report. Accountability talks about responsibility, and it also talks about consequences. So the question becomes, who's accountable for the education of our children? And it has to be, when we look at it, it's much deeper than just saying they filled out some reports and turned in some data and said this is what they're doing. It talks about results and all those other kinds of things that go into it. So when we really develop an accountability system, we will probably have something that we can all celebrate one day. But at this point, being responsible for putting in data and information is a simple process. And I'm glad my colleagues brought this forward in the Assembly. We hope to have it as a part of something that all of us can look at and embrace. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Assemblywoman.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I will just add that.
It's too late.
Well, then I'll just keep going. I tend to agree with my colleagues up here. We seem to have a focus on numbers and percentages rather than the outcome. we could change all of that by taking the percentages out and having a report letting us know exactly how the money is being spent. You have any thoughts on that?
So right now, on a district-by-district basis, we do know how districts are planning to spend their money. We do have the standardized accounting code structure, which does provide information about how districts actually spend their money, but that structure is not currently aligned with the buckets of money that districts receive under LCFF. Under the old categorical system, it was aligned with the particular categoricals that districts receive, but it's not been realigned to the LCFF. Should the legislature want to be able to use that structure to look at districts' expenditures, then it would require an overhaul of that reporting structure.
Or just going back to the old structure as far as reporting, right?
The sort of rules under the old structure were governed by the categorical program rules, so districts reported their expenditures according to the requirements dictated by the categoricals, so there isn't a similar framework under LCFF, so the account codes that they would align with particular expenditures don't quite line up anymore.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. We're going to move to page 16, homeless youth accountability.
So this is a proposal from the Assembly. This would add, so this again is not tied to funding as the previous proposal, but it is add language that would create a new subgroup for homeless youth. And so what this really means, what it means when we create a new subgroup is if you have what's a numerically significant subgroup, there are two effects on a school district. One is that when they report performance data, when they report outcomes on student assessments, they need to disaggregate data based on that group. So this would require then in the future as we report data that homeless youth performance be reported separately from other groups. And then for the purposes of developing an LCAP, local control and accountability plan, districts would be required if they had a numerically significant amount of students, which I believe the proposal is to, if for any district that has 15 or more homeless youth, that they be required to set goals and specify the actions that they're going to take to help these specific students meet their goals and describe some of the service they would be providing. So this would mean that districts in their LCAPs, for those districts who have 15 or more homeless youth, would need to have more information in their local control and accountability plans regarding how they're intending to serve those students.
Sounds good. This is a speaker priority. Any response from the administration or LAO?
We're still vetting the language and trying to get a better understanding of what the impact will be on districts who will have to track this information, but we do recognize that it's a very vulnerable group of individuals.
I'm not sure if it has any financial impact because it's not like we're creating additional pot of money for this group. We're adding this group to the list of students. And since the people aren't counted twice, if you're poor and language issues, you're counted once. So this would be if you're poor and language issue and homeless, you're counted once. So, but I think what it does do is it makes the schools begin to acknowledge the fact that there are some homeless students in there and that they need to plan around how they're going to provide services if they end up with 15, 20 kids who are homeless. And we're seeing that occurring in several schools where there's 30, 40 kids who are homeless. I was at a school recently where that was the case. And that school, fortunately for them, one of my schools had a beautiful program to deal with the kids and the parents. They had one night a week that they had dinner for everybody in the family to come. They had partners with a local church, and they had some things going on. So they were conscious of this homeless population that they had, and they prepared like snacks and things for the kids to take home in the evening with the awareness that they may not have dinner, you know, those kinds of things. So I think our homeless population is growing. We know that from the stuff that we're doing now. And so with that in mind, we want to make sure that they are counted because they too suffer certain disadvantages as a result of not having a stable place to live in terms of their academics. And so they fall into a category similar like foster care. So this would just add another category. My understanding is it would not add funding to it, but just another category for kids for us to be aware of. in our county.
I would just add some issues to consider if you do. I think we agreed that none of this would change any district's LCFF funding amount. I think an important issue to consider if you do want to move forward on this is the issue of data. We had this conversation when 2 years ago when we adopted LCFF, we added foster youth as a subgroup. And there was a significant amount of work to have the Department of Social Services talk to the Department of Ed to ensure that districts actually knew who their foster youth were, because right now there's not a specific way, unlike with free and reduced price meals where students then submit forms, you don't have a way to ensure that districts know. So you might have a similar issue with homeless youth. So you just might want to consider ways that we could, things that the state might need to do to ensure that districts are aware of whether they have a homeless student, and perhaps making sure that they know throughout the year how many students they have, given that this is a population that can be very transient and moving throughout the year.
I know that happened a lot with the foster youth, because it took schools a while to even know who they were, because they didn't come initially with a packet. And so many of the social service agencies are working now with the schools directly to make sure that as those students move from place to place, that they're at least alerted that this child is coming in who's a part of the foster care system. And that's a real challenge, because oftentimes you don't know. And you don't know until the person signs as a guardian at the school that somehow or another they may be a foster child involved. So yeah, it will require some identification issues. That fortunately can be a local control issue, because schools are very good about figuring out what's in their communities and how to get the word out. But I think the thought is that if we put it out there on the radar, schools will become conscious of it. Right now, some schools are not aware of it, and they're not aware that they have to provide services for this additional population if they begin to notice it. So I think working out the language and the logistics would be very important, yes. Anyone else, any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, I just said, following up on what Mr. Cabral said, because I agree that there's probably some technical tracking issues. It's not a very simple system. You're not in a system like a foster care system when you're in the category of homeless. But so that creates some challenges. I think the way the language is drafted would be very important to us, because this has the possibility of creating a new mandate and increasing costs in the future.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Yes.
I just want to ditto your remarks, Dr. Weber. Again, this is an extremely important cohort for us to understand and be able to count. And with the understanding that there may be some resource expenditure required, I don't think we're going to be able to quantify that very well, because this is a very transient population. The teachers tend to know who these students are. And the opportunity here is to identify so that schools know who those students are, can provide services, and because it's a transient population, track them from school to school as necessary. But until we start to do this in a better way than we're doing it now, we're not going to be nearly as effective as we should be in addressing one of the most at-risk populations that we have in our schools, and that affects outcomes. And I think the entire objective of our process here is to improve outcomes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we can move on then to item on page 17.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. We are at pupils of limited academic English proficiency, again, an Assembly proposal. Ms. Chu.
So the Assembly adopted a trailer bill and an appropriation of $1 million specifying funds for the Los Angeles Unified School District to partner with the University of California, Los Angeles to conduct an evaluation of LAUSD's academic English mastery program. The governor and Senate had no proposal. We recommend taking the Senate. Districts currently have the flexibility to work with research organizations to do program evaluations, and frequently do so. In the majority of cases, districts will use their general fund resources to support these types of evaluations that they may wish to conduct. To our knowledge, the state has not supported a district-specific program evaluation like this one previously. Should this type of evaluation be considered valuable, however, the legislature may want to expand the scope of the evaluation to other school districts in other areas of the state so that the state could learn how to improve English language acquisition statewide, expand programs, or scale up anything that might be useful in other localities around the state.
Okay, the primary purpose of this proposal came out of originally a legislative proposal to basically implement what the district once had, which was a proficiency in English program. I can't remember the exact name of it. That was relatively successful at the time. And to respond to the ongoing issue of the underperformance in the English language of children who are American-born children, African Americans and now Latinos who are American-born, who are not proficient in English because they don't get the bilingual English instruction, but yet they're not proficient in English. And LA has a program. So rather than reinvent the wheel, rather than send our Department of Education folks off to figure out how to do this, we felt there's a program in LA Unified School District that has been doing this for a number of years and is at a point of the research stage to figure out what are the strategies, how effective is the program, so forth and so on. So the thought was that we would support their efforts to get this research done in an impartial way through UCLA, which is what they're trying to get done. And then that too would be, as you point out, something that we would look at statewide as we grapple with this issue, because we have had the underperformance, particularly of African American children in the area of English for years. And we've had a few programs that have come in, some call the Ebonics program or whatever, but none of it has come to the level of research that really says this is a major issue. We need to deal with it. It's an issue of language for children who are American-born, English speakers technically, but are not proficient in English. And we're seeing that population grow as we end up with more of our students coming to being born in the United States, but not really proficient in English. African Americans, basically, but now we have a growing population of Latinos who are not proficient in English, who are entering our schools, but who know enough English to speak English, and so therefore they don't fall into the bilingual category. So we're looking at different strategies. LA Unified has a program, and so as you point out, this would be an excellent opportunity to take what we glean from that and scale it up so that the State Department then could basically begin to talk about developing a program that we used to have that is effective in terms of addressing the issue of English proficiency in California.
I think the one thing I would just add is that if the legislature wished to pursue this program evaluation, to consider widening the scope to go beyond LAUSD to other school districts who might be operating similar types of programs in the event there are things to glean from those programs, or they just face different circumstances because of the location of the school district,
Right.
be it in the Central Valley, Northern California, other challenges that might be unique to LAUSD that might be unique to these other areas of the state that aren't exhibited in LAUSD.
Sure, and I assume they would have the opportunity, UCLA, to do that, to look at the various programs that currently exist. I understand LA Unified has the largest program of this type right now, and given the wide range of the population in LA Unified, it would probably collect a number of those other areas. Oftentimes, the other populations we see are already in our bilingual education program, which also needs to be continued to evaluate and assess, but that's another whole discussion in itself in terms of transition from those programs to standard English.
Okay. Assemblywoman, thank you for that explanation. Ms. Bosler, I'll give you a chance to respond in a moment. And I heard your comments, Ms. Chu, but if we don't do this, and $1 million is a modest investment, I'd like to know, what are we going to do? Because just to continue to ignore this growing phenomenon is only going to cause us and this next generation of folks big problems.
So our recommendation, I think, is more targeted to the specific proposal here, that it is a unique situation that the state would fund an evaluation specific to one particular district. This is an increasing issue in school districts, this issue of students who are born in the United States but do not have academic English proficiency or standard English proficiency. And should the legislature want to conduct a study or a contract for a study to be conducted on how to combat this issue, that would be worthwhile for the legislature to do. But we were simply saying that it's quite out of the norm to sort of call out this
Sure.
specific program
And
from the
I
state level.
understand, and I'm not looking for many proposals that we have in our book here to set new precedents and to open doors that we're going to have to only try and close later. I think of this not so much as an evaluation of a district project as our good fortune of having a project somewhere in the state, and we want to figure out what we can learn from it so we can benefit the entire state. It's not to benefit a district. Ms. Bosler? You're going to agree with the
Our
LAO?
comments are very similar to the LAOs. I think we are not comfortable with the specific earmark for a specific district. We understand that LA Unified has been funding the study for the last 2 years and continuing to work on that, and I think we would all be interested in seeing the outcomes of their research, but just not comfortable with this specific arrangement.
Thank you. All right. Page 18, and I'm getting word from the Senate floor that we're going to need to go back as they're closing down. I think they have about 5-7 more bills left, so we're trying to monitor so we can get as much out of this as possible. I'm sorry for, again, interrupting. Page 18 is kindergarten implementation report. And the governor had a proposal here.
This was part of our January budget proposal to fund the study that was created in AB 1719 by Dr. Weber, so last year. This is evaluation of a kindergarten program implementation in the state, including part day and full day programs. And so our best bet, our working with the Department of Ed, thought $250,000 was appropriate amount of money to support the development of that study. And I believe the Assembly has added additional monies that we're not supportive of.
Very good. Ms. Chu, I understand that the Assembly thought an extra $100,000 was needed to be able to successfully contract for this.
Yes, the Assembly augmented the Department of Education, or the governor's proposal by $350,000, bringing the total to $600,000 total. At the time that AB 1719 was passed, the Appropriations Committee believed that doing the type of study therein would cost roughly $250,000. So the governor's proposal is roughly consistent with that estimate. The bill did change a little bit from when the Appropriations Committee made their estimate to final passage. Though that said, we would recommend taking the Senate's action, as the final bill simply requires CDE to determine the best practices of implementing a full-day kindergarten program and to collect data about the frequency of part-day versus full-day kindergarten across the state. And we believe that the $250,000 would be sufficient to conduct this study and is similar to amounts provided for child care characteristics studies that look at similar data points, as well as career technical education studies that collect best practices data.
Thank you. Page 19 brings us to Standards Implementation Office at State Operations. This is an Assembly proposal.
Yes,
Mr. Brow.
Yes, and just to clarify, the previous proposal and this proposal were now out of 98. These are non-98 general fund funding directly to the Department of Education. The Assembly provided $640,000 and 4 positions for a standards implementation office. And the idea is that this office would help support local needs in implementing the state standards, that they would be kind of the state level oversight role, providing trainings, helping figure out where there are best practices, and help ensure that that some of this information is being disseminated across the state. I think that with this, I think similar to some of the conversations we had previously on the consortia and others, we think that it's an important conversation about what the state's role should be. I think you do want to have a state role in what should the state role be in implementing these standards, not just implementing the standards, but more broadly in helping school districts improve instruction and help ensure that students are learning. We think that's an important conversation. We do think it's a little bit tricky right now because we are in the middle of fully implementing our evaluation rubric system. We are also in the process of the California Collaborative getting up and running. The state provided $10 million for the collaborative 2 years ago, and most of that funding still has not been necessarily spent. So we do think this is an important conversation, but we don't think right now the other pieces have been kind of figured out to determine kind of what the right role of the department would be, kind of and how that fits in with what the collaborative will do, and also what county offices are doing in supporting districts.
Thank you for that, Ms. Bosler.
We also support the Senate here. We're not supportive of reestablishing the Standards Implementation Office for similar reasons that Mr. Cabral has stated, and our focus is really on developing and bringing to full scale the California Collaborative for Excellence to serve many of the same purposes that would be served here in the Standards Implementation Office.
All right. We are getting definitive word that we need to get to the floor, so we're going to break here. $4:15 safe? All right. We will recess until 4:15. Thank you. For the late afternoon session of our Budget Conference Committee, we are on page 20 and at the issue of a lawsuit settlement, I'm told, is not quite settled, and we may be hearing sometime this week. Is that wishful thinking?
So I think the Department of Education could speak more specifically to the timeline with regards to the settlement. I don't have an update for you on that in terms of the timing, but yes, the issue before you is one in which the Assembly provided $571,000 to the Department of Education for additional positions to do monitoring of English learner programs in particular districts across the state. As way of context, there was a lawsuit brought against the state by parents and students, and the suit was stating that the Department of Education failed to ensure that English learners were being provided the required programs under federal law and the California Constitution. The judge did find that the districts were denying students these services, and that the Department of Education did have a requirement under federal law to provide these services. So the Assembly action provided some additional monitoring capacity for the department, though our recommendation would be to take the Senate, given the fact that the settlement hasn't yet been finalized and we do not know what the terms will be of the settlement. In addition, given that the focus of the ruling by the judge was on the federal program and not on our state program, we would say that there's a bit of a fund source issue in terms of whether federal Title III dollars, which are what are provided for English learner programs, or state funds should be used to ensure that the students not receiving services are guaranteed access to those programs.
Thank you, Ms. Chu. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, we also support the Senate proposal. We are in settlement, or we're in ongoing discussions with the plaintiffs in this case. And as with all lawsuits, if there are terms that need to be implemented, we would be developing a funding plan to put in place in order to meet the terms of a settlement agreement. So this is just premature at this point.
Can we even imagine what the cost of that might be? Would it be in the neighborhood of where the Assembly is?
We don't know until the final settlement is really done. And so that is still under active negotiation, is my latest report from our lawyers involved in that. And as soon as we do know a final agreement, we will be happy to report back to the committee. And if it is as soon as this week or next week, we'd be happy to report then.
All right. Good. We'll move on. That completes K through 12, and we'll move on to community colleges.